Hello world! Today we're working on a 2010 Ford Flex. We're going to do pads and rotors. Now first we're going to go ahead and remove these 5 lug nuts. They're 19mm. Then we're going to go ahead and remove the 2 bolts that hold the caliper. And if I remember correctly, they should be 15mm. So we're going to go ahead and get those out of the way, remove the caliper. Sometimes they may be stuck, so we may need to get a screwdriver or pry bar in there. Now you see me pointing at the rotor only because my customer described that he had vibration when depressing the brake pedal. So that can happen with warped rotors, and as I felt and kind of tried to describe to him, that even though his brake pads were not worn all the way, his rotor was slightly warped. Now let's go ahead and remove the 2 main caliper bracket bolts, which, if I'm correct, should be 18mm. I do use metric sockets instead of SAE. Now the front screw to hold the rotor in place, I believe it's a T25 or T30 or T27. Kind of just don't remember right now off the top of my head. But just make sure to have at least those 3 different sizes on hand. So now let's get these bolts out of the way. Remove the caliper bracket. Luckily these rotors came right off, so sometimes you may need a hammer or something to get them out of the way. We're going to go ahead and install the new rotor. Put that little holding screw back in place. You always want to hand tighten it first, or at least, start to thread with all the bolts, especially when you're dealing with any sort of brake components or just any sort of bolt in general, is my kind of rule of thumb, because then we have stripping issues and nobody wants that. So once it's in place, we can go ahead and fasten it down. Now I brought a dual piston caliper. You may not have this tool, you may have something else. You can use large pliers or a C-clamp, or if you have the single piston winding tool, then you can use that. Just put the brake pad in place. I just so happen to have the dual piston one. Now we're going to go ahead and put the caliper bracket on. Now if those pins that I touched don't move easily, you may want to apply grease there, as it will prevent uneven wear. We're going to go ahead and tighten down, or at least put those in there, fasten those bolts in there. Then we are going to double check with our ratchet to make sure they're nice and tight. Now normally I do trust that little impact stubby to get it nice and tight, but I always want to go ahead and double check. Sometimes I just get it on there just finger tight, and then I go ahead and try to torque it down. Now we're going to put brake pads. If you notice, I did not replace the hardware. Part of why I do that is a lot of the times I have noise issue. Now I use the original ones if they are reusable. Sometimes they do get damaged, so you do have to unfortunately use the new one provided, with your brake pads. Now let's put the caliper back on, put those bolts back in place. As I said before, you want to get it in there by hand first before using any sort of power tool. Typically these are small bolts, so you don't want to use power tools. This guy, I believe right now, is at its lower setting, so I'm going to go ahead and fasten them. I usually start with the bottom one, even when I'm doing it by hand. I don't know why, for some reason it's easier to do the bottom first and then the top than to try to do the top and then the bottom, but everybody has different results. Now I'm going to go ahead and make sure that these guys are nice and snug in there. And that's about it.